Howdy.
Howdy.
Hello, hello.
How's everybody's Tuesday going?
Um, yeah, I'm good, doing well. That's why. How are you?
Acceptable, decent.
My cat keeps throwing up. So I have that to look forward to after this meeting.
It's nice.
Yeah.
Was that cat throw up? Yeah, I have 4 cats, so these things happen.
Yeah, this one's an old man with, I think, feline IBS or something. And despite the very sensitive diet.
Been there. We have an 18-year-old in the house.
Yeah,
So,
that's old.
Oh, wow. Distinguished gentleman.
indeed.
My big activity over the past week has been joining random like social Slack channels that are like nerdy and saying like I thought Dune was bad, and then watching people like flip out. It's really.
So trolling.
I mean, I did think it was bad. It's like just Dune was okay, I guess, and people are like, what? No, how could you possibly?
What has been the troll?
Just saying Dune was fair, bad, kind of
Well, fair and bad are different.
bad. I said bad. I was pretty.
Bad,
I was
right.
pretty critical. I felt it was.
Is it that you thought it was a bad adaptation of a good story, or you think the story itself is bad?
So I never read the books actually, but I think it's a decent adaptation of a limited primary text. But I have to read the primary text to understand that, to really get the depth. But I think cool visuals, cool cinematography, plot.
I think
yeah.
most of the sci-fi that's been coming out recently is sci-fi eye candy, because I have read the books. They are problematic. The story itself and characters are problematic. I've read Foundation, and I'm watching Apple TV's Foundation series, and
that's upsetting to me.
I've gotten to a point where I'm enjoying hate watching it, because it's like sci-fi eye candy, but this is not these aren't the characters in this isn't the story in the books. So I'm just like, all right, you're telling a different story where you've reused names.
It's I was annoyed. I stopped after like 2 episodes or something.
It got worse. If by worse, if the measure of quality is adherence to the original texts,
right.
It got worse.
Good to know. Yeah, the text it's unfilmable as a text, is my opinion. Anyway,
Cool. So on to something even worse. We'll go ahead and start the spec sig recap and go from there. It was pretty short for the most part. The metrics API is reaching stability apparently and should be merged today. Oh, has been merged. There you go. The sampling PR is also on track to be merged soon, I think. There's been a new section added, or I guess since last time we talked about it, the section that has been added is around trace completeness. So this section here. yeah, I guess there's now this areas of interest part of the OpenTelemetry community. So which is a call for specifically maintainers and approvers. So feel free to add yourself. I guess it would be under this category. Yeah, if you want to mention the things that you have an area of interest in so that people can find you, track you down, and ask hard questions or something. So there is an issue about whether the sampler's description should be immutable. I don't know what people are doing with the description where it should matter either way, but apparently, well, I guess it looks like it probably applies to the Jaeger remote sampler.
Yeah, I know Tim's been working on some sampling stuff, so he may have some opinions because I could see the use case. The sampling stuff is definitely dynamic. So I think the description is just avoiding that by not including all the dynamic details as he's written it, but that's interesting. I don't think it could hurt if it's not frozen and could be changed. Could provide some benefits, I guess. Basically, if the sampler, updates according to, I don't know, some API call, and then it's like updates its sampling value, you would want the sampler description at that time to reflect, well, what's the returned, sampling rate at the time, which might be different in 5 or 10 minutes or something.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think that totally makes sense. That you're kind of including some sort of like information about the actual sampling rates that can be dynamic in the description, and the description should be able to accurately reflect those. Yeah, I didn't feel like there was any strong opposition. It was just a mention that, hey, we had this issue, and if anybody knows why it was immutable, please chime in, because we should probably change it, was kind of the impression I got.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then it kind of moved on to more metrics discussions. So I don't know how useful it is to go into so much of these unless we are actually working on stuff. I think that there was kind of a discussion about OTLP, and OTLP kind of has this like instrumentation library name stuff on, spans and metrics, kind of group stuff by them. And I think that this main discussion here was about, and kind of the whole reason for that is that, we have this named tracer or named meter situation, and the both of these kind of help prevent like conflicts in names when you think about it. So if you have like a named tracer and you might not know what name everybody is using for a span in the application, but if you know the names that your instrumentation library is using for spans, like you're not going to get a duplicate. And it's kind of like this because of this instrumentation library things. You can always scope things by instrumentation library and get like a unique span name, no matter what, things are happening elsewhere in the app. For spans, that's convenient. I think for metrics, it's actually like a really good feature because all this data like aggregates, and you don't want to accidentally start aggregating data that isn't the same, because you get weird stuff happening. But I think the issue is that trying to like map other systems onto OTLP is not always seamless because they don't necessarily have these concepts. So I think they were trying to like figure out how to resolve that. So I think one suggestion was that if you're using something like Prometheus, perhaps you could export a meter name as a label on a metric and go that route.
I had a quick metrics question. It popped up the other day in unrelated, but okay. So metric label is to span attribute or span attribute is to metric label as span resource attribute is to blank. Like, is it also metric resource attribute or like, what is a resource attribute for a metric?
So I think a metric has the same resource attributes. We can go.
I poked around the spec and was like a little confused. Yeah, I should be looking at the proto, I guess.
Yeah, I think before I say something horribly wrong, I would like to look at the.
That makes
At the
sense
proto.
to me.
And I will still probably say something horribly wrong, but.
Oh, I mean, it's just, a host name, a service name would be applicable to a span or a metric. And so, okay,
But yeah, so
cool.
Spans, we have resource spans. Here we have resource metrics, and
Cool.
it's kind of the same deal. And I think the other thing is that I think everything is attributes now. So I think
Yeah,
we're sometimes still using this word label. I was wondering if we were using label here because we're talking about Prometheus, and Prometheus will call these things labels, but
Right. That's my understanding too, is Prometheus language kind of sneaks into some of the discussions, but it is metric attribute. Or it ought to be, or people agreed it was. I don't know if it got updated. But okay, thank you. That's not super specific to the question. Yeah, I think it would be important to have some sort of library name added to metrics. It happens when at Datadog, when we were having to derive metrics from spans. The span operation generally wasn't sufficient, or the span kind wasn't sufficient as a unique thing on which like to create a metric from. And so we had to do like, it was like instrumentation library name, sort of like normalized dot span kind dot something else. So like it was, otherwise you get I don't know, you get multiple HTTP libraries combined all into one metric and stuff like goofy stuff like that you don't really want to do. So cool. Yeah, I mean, it'd be good to get this support out of the box with Prometheus stuff, because that'll be what most metrics are coming in as, I think.
We have a similar situation with metrics at Honeycomb where like the collector host metrics. So the collector scrapes up a whole bunch of stuff and differentiates between two things in values rather than attribute names. So we have to do some transforms to turn them into like this metric coming in has an attribute of like CPU1 versus CPU2. I'm like, let's just throw those into column names and they have a value so that we could squish them into wider events. I say that because having a library name means that we can go, oh, that instrumentation library is emitting a metric. We know what those metric shapes are, so we can transform them into higher cardinality events. And so, yeah, when we need to do fiddly bits like that,
cool.
Knowing the origin of a number is useful.
Agreed.
Cool. Yeah, this does validate the design. I will admit that, like, when named tracers appeared on the scene, I was confused and not convinced they were a good idea. But I think that's a natural reaction to any change in the world. It should be. People should fear change. But as they've been around, like it does seem like they do solve a lot of problems at the minor inconvenience of having to kind of name your tracer when you get it. But yeah, at first they were a weird thing. I think if you were to watch any of the old recordings, it would probably be Francis and I like holding our heads talking about named tracers or
Don't worry, no one's watching.
Admittedly, as I was getting no open telemetry, having to name a tracer, like to get a tracer, you have to give it a name, an optional version. I'm like, why would I do that? And
yeah,
couple weeks, maybe a month in, I'm like, oh, okay, I see. Know the provenance of a thing that was emitted.
yeah. Turns out it's useful, which is
Yeah,
awesome.
it turns out knowing where your data came from, it's useful.
Yeah, so I think these are all notes generally from that discussion. I think they were starting to talk about maybe trying to prototype that out in some languages and see how that would interact with the collector. So yeah, that was really the spec sig. Any questions, comments, or concerns that we didn't get to?
I can talk about it.
We use the StatsD.
Oh, yeah, I like StatsD. I like John Allspawn. Let's see. I can talk about the RSpec thing. I'm interested if people have opinions on that. But if other people have more, I know Rob had some stuff he was bumping up against last week. If there's any, I don't have anything burning.
I was bumping. What you mean yesterday? I was bumping up.
Yeah,
against,
yeah. Are you stuck there still? Is there anything?
I am not stuck. I have not dug deeply enough yet to like
Okay.
figure out what was going on. The app it's another open source Rails app. Has other things in it like Sentry and AppSignal already. I turned off those gems. It does not appear that they are eating the exception such in a way that the rack instrumentations in span call in the middleware wouldn't see the exception. I have it on my plan maybe today to try to replicate the issue in a much simpler Rails app before
what you're saying is that it's not reaching record exception.
I haven't debugged to that level yet.
All we know so
Saying
far
I
is,
don't in
No
a
worries.
collector receiving these traces don't see a span event for the exception.
And you tried a console exporter as well?
No, I only did collector or OTLP exporter to a collector, but that'll be my next step. I'll try a console exporter.
cool.
So yeah, I'm not opening a bug yet. Could totally be me, but I'll try that next.
I've seen anecdotally times when people have rack middleware or stuff that gets in the way and swallows stuff, or before it reaches where we'd expect. So it's possible.
When Sentry is enabled, Sentry sees the exception, but when I disabled Sentry, it didn't change any behavior. So I don't know. I'll dig in deeper before I open any bugs.
No worries. I just wanted to make sure you had time.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm around if you need anything. I could talk about the RSpec stuff. I reviewed the RSpec PR. I think it's pretty much good to merge. Like there is some small feedback, like some of the attribute names ought to get, I think, prefixed, the same way we do like messaging dot whatever, or some of them are some of the attribute names, span attributes are like kind of arbitrary. So it just feels like a good housekeeping thing because we're sort of like inventing specification here, or to say like, well, let's prefix this stuff because the names themselves aren't super descriptive. The only other thing, and like there's no this is sort of like not established anywhere, except like I was looking at like Jana Dugan wrote like a Go test instrumentation, and like I was looking at the Datadog stuff, like setting this stat, like what determines when you would set a span status of error for, you know, an RSpec test. And so like I kind of interpret it, it looks like the prior art is like, if the test fails, then you say this, the RSpec span is an error, or it has a status of error. And, you know, you provide the description of what, I forget, there's like some message you can provide. But that's sort of like not, I just made that up. That's like, I could see that being a, you know, in my mind, the reason you have RSpec instrumentation is you want to see like, okay, I ran my test suite. How many failed tests do I have? And the best way, the canonical way to sort of check that in like the open OTLP context is like check status of like, so, you know, however many traces are like errors equals, could be 1-to-1 with like however many traces are like failed tests. But like, that's not defined anywhere. It just sort of felt like good practice. So that was my only real feedback. Like that was the only thing missing. I thought everything else looked fine. And I sort of feel like we should, because it's like experimental, we should just sort of like get it out in the wild and you know, whatever. And if people want to like give feedback around our conventions on whatever we're missing some attribute, like cool. But yeah, I don't know. So that was, I finally took a look. Sorry for the delay with this stuff, but yeah, it was good. I think it's a useful instrumentation. Yeah, and there's good directions in there on like how to set up a separate pipeline basically. So it doesn't interfere with your existing, you know, so it's sort of like, let's say you have instrumentation you want to run and check correctness of, like your RSpec spans won't interfere with those. Anyway, yeah, I think it's good stuff. It would be nice to see, I tried to take like a little survey of like what the broader community is doing around tracing for like test libraries. And besides like Jana's thing, which is just like an open source that, you know, she didn't like make a repo in the context of OpenTelemetry. Like she just like made a personal repo. Like there's no real, like, I couldn't find anything else in other languages. I didn't dig super deeply. But yeah, it would be nice to see specification get formed, but like, I don't really want to be the person to do it because it's a lot of work and yeah. So anyway, that was my RSpec feedback. What else? Yeah, I don't know. That's about all I have. I guess.
I'm really curious about the schema URL stuff because that's impacting, like that might impact our direction going in the future, and kind of like what my thoughts are about the like evolving the semantic conventions gem in some way, right? Because we're generating them as like constants right now, but not really leveraging them. Mm-hmm. You know, we've had some chatter about this. I think I just have to get myself more involved in the conversation upstream, but trying to understand like how do we, including like if there's only one notion of one schema, does that schema represent all versions of auto instrumentation, semantic conventions, and then as far as like our extensions to them? So in a sense, like any library instrumentation that we write, we're generating attributes in some cases that aren't part of like the official semantic conventions also, right?
Right.
And so like, what's our play there? Do we say that for a specific version of SemConf, all of these gems, like does each gem know what version of SemConf it's using? It's a little ambiguous to me versus like, say like when you look at the Golang implementation, there are specific versions of the library that are imported for, I guess it's a dependency stream, I guess. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my understanding is they're revisiting schema URL specification in general, and they recognize that there's not enough. So so with instrumentations, you can optionally specify a schema URL that it adheres to.
Okay.
you don't have to.
Sure.
And that
Mhm.
doesn't have to be in lockstep with your SDK, like your resource schema convention, your schema URL. That can be
Gotcha.
different.
So we
But
can. Mhm, go
sorry,
ahead.
but there isn't really any, and the idea is like there will be some abstract process for like merging this stuff. If like, let's say our Rails instrumentation is based on an older schema, and then our, API or resource schema URL is like the latest one, there will be some process for like, doing the translation to the latest one, but that's all arbitrary and hasn't been done anywhere.
So like
And
that,
I think it's not well defined.
So is the semantic convention versioning includes the resource trace and metric and instrumentation sumconv, or
You can set schema URL can be, so like all schema URL points to is like a file of
Yeah.
YAML, and it's like translations from attribute name to attribute name.
Yeah.
That should be based on it can be the like a OTLP semantic convention version. It doesn't have to be. It can be like some arbitrary like GitHub semantic conventions. You can define it for a particular instrumentation or for like your resource, basically. And I'm sorry, I'm talking in circles, I guess.
It's all good.
And then the problem is like there's no real agreement or process around like, well, how do you merge these things if they're different, or if where do you merge them? Hasn't really been clearly defined, I think. They're starting in Go. What happened is they realized that you can basically merging resources of two different semantic conventions. So let's say your resource detector uses a different semantic schema URL than like the resource you use in like your SDK, like default stuff. What would happen is there's a merge error on that resource and you lose everything. Like you basically lose all the attributes instead of just like losing just the schema URL. And I'm not doing a very good job here. Basically what I'm saying is they've sort of, I think, now circled back and realized there hasn't been enough, they haven't done a good enough job defining some of this behavior.
Okay.
And my understanding is like, aside from us implementing support so that like it's available as like an argument if you want to define a resource, and like it's added in like the protos, like when we do export, like we really shouldn't do too much here until there's more
Thanks.
defined, because otherwise it'll be a mess.
I appreciate you walking me through this, and I see that Matt brought up on his screen the protos. So clearing up the ambiguity for me is that each instrumentation can have its own version of the semantic conventions. Each resource can have its own. The resource can have its own version of the semantic conventions, and the this is going to sound really silly, but any manual spans are considered a name tracer, which is an internal internal instrumentation library. So each then internal span set can have its own schema.
The schema URL gets passed to a tracer provider. I'm not doing a great job remembering.
It's okay. Would you mind scrolling around a little bit, Matt? And I apologize if this is not what people want to talk about.
Oh, it's good. The other thing to bring up is like, if let's say we have some non-semantic convention attributes, like, I don't know, RSpec is a good example, right?
Mhm.
We want to say like, well, how do we like version this stuff and like say it relates, like, or let's say you have some honeycomb specific, semantic, there's no real way to do like parentage or sort of like root schema URLs. And so like the honeycomb schema URL or like the, Shopify one, there's no way to define that it's like a superset of a particular version of like Hotel's schema URL. So it's, yeah, basically, unless it's like, there's no real clear way to do that stuff.
Gosh, it's like XML namespacing all over again, only in Protobus.
Uh,
I mean,
So
it doesn't
this would be
list-
why we have just like, you tell us what your columns are. We'll derive it from the data that you send us. And if you get some weird queries because some spans come in calling a field one thing and other spans come in calling that what is in essence the same data but has a different column name, we're like, cool. You said
Matt,
there are ways for you to like say, oh, those are the same thing. We're just going to give it this third name. And
Matt, what's the repository that has the protobus in it?
It is OpenTelemetry-Proto.
Thank you.
The important thing to note for this is okay. So as I talked about, I realize I understand schema URL less well than I would like, but the implementation is essentially a ripoff of what Python did, and they appear to understand it. So if you do choose to review, I would say review it, comparing it to what Python's done. It should be one-to-one. I think there's some minor open questions around like our Google, our GCP resource detector, like, do we want to define, technically that should define a schema URL,
Yes.
I believe, but it's a little bit unclear to me whether if our doing so would become in practice very problematic. If, because it would in effect create resource merge errors if any user wants to then define their own schema URL, I believe, which feels like something they wouldn't expect to happen, even if it's technically correct. I don't know. So yeah, I'm kind of like fine to let this sit for a while. We should probably, at some point, we probably will need to get it merged to like keep up with spec.
Sorry, I'm gonna beat this horse to death. So the protobus, looking at the protobus again.
Mhm.
So the instrumentation library resource spans, that message is a collection. It's wrapping the collection of the instrumentation spans, has a single resource, has a schema, and that schema corresponds to the resource, not to the library. The library span itself in its wrapper message includes the schema URL with its list of spans that all correspond to the instrumentation library resource data. And where's that resource?
I think
Those
the
resource
behavior
spans
is,
are in trace data, and then trace data is what is exported, right? At the top level to the exporter.
I think
Okay.
what's the idea is if instrumentation doesn't define a schema URL, but
Yeah.
the resource does,
Use
then
the resource.
the resource one should get applied like somewhere. But I don't think it's at export time. It's like, like it can,
It's
I don't,
interpretation time, essentially. Like a
yeah,
consumption.
whatever, like downstream in a processor, or like, yeah, if you're consuming this stuff, like, as my like sort of vague understanding.
Because theoretically, right, you can from the client side, and you said this already, I'm just reiterating it so I make sure I understand it correctly. As a client, my Rails app is emitting version 1.7. And for simplification purposes, everything is 1.7, and it sends it out, but the downstream, we really want 2.0. So we configure our collectors to say, go from 1.7 to 2.0, because this is my target schema output. And the collectors processor pipeline will have a attribute schema processor or schema attribute processor, whatever, and that does the transformations and emits version 2.0. And then you look in Honeycomb, and then you scan around in there, and you're like, oh, everything's in 2.0. But Honeycomb also can be like, oh, as I'm ingesting things, I'm going to do some other transformations and special stuff. To, as Rob pointed out, I want to name event X to be event Y or whatever it is. And there we are.
I think that's correct.
This was Ariel. This was a hypothetical future wherein there is a was that a hypothetical future where there's a schema translator in collector?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
hypothetical future. Yes.
I think one thing they've recognized.
I'm a
is
fan of the hypothetical future.
is not every, the collector can't be assumed as like, there's folks here who represent companies that encourage people to not use a collector in some use cases. And so like, I think they want to be able to have that processing, like we talked about last week, within app, which is a performance penalty, but I think they do want that. And then also there's ambiguity around like, well, what if you've defined your schema at, whatever in your column encoded backend, like at 1.5, and now like, and it's already been set and you have all your dashboarding on 1.5 and you're indexing, and then like, but the schema's moved on to like 1.8. You can't, there's no way to like walk it back down. There's no way to do like backward compatibility right now, which is problematic because, at some point you have to you want to be able to like, know what columns you have in your backend maybe. Anyway, so I think there's still lots of like whole gaps in how this can be used practically speaking to like provide value for people.
Yeah.
But
so it's like, again, this goes back to kind of like, all right, sorry, I'm dragging the meeting on.
no, there's nothing else.
It's just more about like our implementation and what we can do to obstruct, to mitigate like having the instrumentations become complicated as how they choose what name they want for a particular thing. If we're ultimately wanting to like a instrumentation, whatever, rack 1.7 versus 2.3 or something like that. It's like, what do those are instrumentation semantic versioning map to a semantic convention, or is that something that we want holistically to be able to support across all instrumentations? And it looks to me like each instrumentation, based on the protobuf, is given the flexibility to run with a specific semantic convention version.
Yeah, I think that's right. The semantic convention version would be included in the schema URL file that
Yes.
the instrumentation schema URL would point to.
And I think that's the best that instrumentation could be expected to do, to say, this is the version of the semantic conventions that I emitted my stuff with. And
Yeah,
if you don't
it's-
like it, you got to transform it. And here's what I emitted.
it's good. I mean, because like in practice, like whatever, Rails 7 will cut a release or whatever, Rails at some point. And like, maybe if we're lucky, they'll add support, first party support for OpenTelemetry stuff. But we can't expect Rails to like pay attention to like, oh, we've changed, this random attribute name, go update, like they just want to be able to say like, this is at the point in time we added this stuff, like here's what the spec said. And we'll assume most libraries will be we'll lose lockstep from, what the latest and greatest version details are and whatever, like, and that's fine but by allowing them to specify like, this is at the time, here's what a snapshot of like what we're looking at was, then they can just sort of write once and forget, and the translation can occur next year. Ideally, when this is all done better, which it's not. And so I'm hesitant to like do much there, except sort of just like merge the support, not really set it anywhere, and kind of hope it doesn't get touched for a little while. Okay. I feel like we're on the same page, generally speaking. I'm just killing time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I could beat this horse to death.
I have a
Yeah.
semi-random horse to possibly start beating on.
Go ahead, man. Go ahead. Let's switch.
Something that I have observed in other language implementations of OpenTelemetry, say the Java agent, and I think soon in .NET, are baked in metrics emitters, particularly in JVM around the JVM metrics, like garbage collection and heap size and all that jazz. Is that I'm slightly intrigued at adding auto instrumentation of the Ruby virtual machine in a little thing that's either opt in or opt out. If you do auto instrumentation all or instrumentation all, maybe it's you've opted in, but it would just pull on some interval. Interesting Ruby virtual machine metrics. I have found that useful in the past.
I think that's great. I think it's a great idea. People, at least in my org, are clamoring for something like that. We could
Simply something like that. Yes, Eric. I've cobbled my own together with judicious application of a thread, but
Yeah, I mean, I think that stuff's great. I'd like to see it. I think it's used. I don't think anyone would say no to it. We just kind of need a metrics API.
So, well,
yeah,
well,
exactly. When we implement metrics and can emit them, it would something like this would be interesting.
You could technically anyway. Yeah. I think I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, we can't really like use the existing metrics reporter for that because that has a very static interface to it.
You could sort of use. I mean, it's essentially a abstraction of stats-D.
Yeah, but the metrics reporter is receiving events, right? But then we would need it to pull by itself and like have its own.
Yeah. You need to run a
heartbeat.
separate. Yeah, you're basically running.
It fires up
stats-D.
its own threads to pull the stuff and emit them. Yeah.
So, but this would be SDK specific to us, and we could.
Why would that be?
As opposed to it being part of the AP, using the API.
If the API has, I can emit metrics interface.
At that point, yes. When we do have the metrics interface,
That's what I mean. I'm not suggesting that this gets
I
started. I'm just in the
don't listen to me, man.
In the iterations towards an OTel Ruby world where we have a metrics API, an instrumentation that would throw out numbers for the RVM.
Does anybody know what's up with the profiler protobuf? OTEP, the PPROF? Oh, really?
Until metrics is, my understanding is until metrics is stable. Not to switch.
I would call that one like that would be an iteration after. Like I just tell me how the RVM's behaving, and then like a profiling thing could be after that. But all of this is predicated on, I agree, all of this is predicated on the API having a metrics implementation.
So I don't know where the right place would, I actually think if someone wanted to write an instrumentation that did that might be the right home for this right now. If you if you didn't want to wait on the metrics API to land in Ruby, you could probably just write an instrumentation that does this. And
no, okay. I mean, you can. I'm not volunteering to write an implementation before the metrics API exists.
I guess, but it would be reported as a span as part of the instrumentation.
No, it would emit. I mean, it would have you would have to pass in your own stats-D client or Prometheus client or whatever is my sort of understanding.
Are you all trying to noodle away to have this thing before we put?
No. I thought, my bad. I thought you were saying like, if you wanted to add this, where would be the right place to land it that you don't have to, you're not blocked by other stuff.
Nope. That's not what I was suggesting.
No
worries, in conjunction with us implementing the metrics API in the API and the SDK, a useful thing to add to OTel Ruby instrumentation would be
100%. I think what's happening to Eric and I is that we got nerds tonight.
Yeah,
my bad. I think it's great. I think it would be a great first, it would allow us to, dog food our own stuff too.
And I was thinking it would be a good, first, it's relatively straightforward to conceptually to wrap your brain around and be like the first consumer of the metrics API. And
Yeah. This
Yeah,
was the most popular, not that, sorry, this was the runtime metric stuff at Datadog was like the number. It was like a killer feature, not to give anyone free product advice, but it was a popular feature among customers. And yeah, I think there'd be great. It would be awesome.
like I said, I've written a really janky dirtball one in a Rails initializer and some threads, but having it better baked with other smarter people reviewing it would be delightful. And yeah, it would as Matt has been browsing around while we've been nerd sniping each other. Yes, all of these semantic conventions are all happily defined.
I don't know if they're all defined, but there's some placeholders where, you know, people have been thinking about some of these things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems like host metrics are maybe somewhat defined. The more of the runtime GC stuff is
I'm
Or
totally
not.
cribbing off of JVM metrics coming out of the Java agent.
yeah, there's at least a runtime prefix that we know about. So so there's that.
We should all program Java. That's what I heard Rob Kid say.
Yeah, that's definitely on brand for me. Yeah.
JRuby.
Anything else we should talk about?
I think if I can nerd snipe y'all with anything else.
Well, bring up the open pull request right now. Maybe it'll refresh our memories or any new issues that might have come up.
Yeah, and I guess on that note, I've heard that Francis and Robert are vacationing. I can only
Good for
assume
them.
together, talking about open telemetry without us.
I think so. Yeah, it's I think it's minus some very crazy number of degrees. So I hope Rob went somewhere warm, but I don't know where he is.
They're both sitting in an ice fishing thing,
Yeah.
talking about immutability. I'm like,
Oh.
I believe it. It's like I watch enough episodes of Letterkenny to know what's going on up there in Canada.
Frozen strings, they take them seriously.
I was just gonna say, in their absence, like if you need anything from me, aggressively ping me and don't feel bad about it, and I will step in and help out with anything. And yeah, I hope I didn't hurt anybody's feelings with that joke. So
No.
apologizing in advance.
The subjects of those jokes are not present, so
Yeah.
they'll watch this on the video later, I'm sure, and
I'm
have
sure.
something to say about it.
Yeah. I
Nobody
hope
misses
that-
an episode, I'm sure.
Any
If
open
If we make
issues?
it spicy enough,
Oh, I will. I do owe there's the Kafka instrumentation that I've been meaning to review. That's from our colleague Andy. I'm pretty
okay.
sure it's good to go. I think Rob had done a pretty thorough review, but I'm gonna give it a pass. It should be useful. The other stuff, I know we merged Tim's work on the active support stuff, so so
Ooh.
that's awesome.
I'm curious about what the active support stuff is. Just I missed it, so I would like to
Oh.
shower praise.
Tim can speak.
Sure. Yeah, it's merged. It basically allows you to derive spans from active support notifications,
Yes.
and it's there. And then in Rails 7, it's better. We don't have to do a bunch of hacky stuff because they made the exception handling around active support notification subscribers. So it's going to be even better.
Nice.
Theo, if
All
you're
right.
watching, thank you for that contribution. But he's not
Yes.
watching. Tim, one question about it. One problem that we're having is with the logging subscribers being really slow on the active support notifications. Have you all experienced that?
You mean which version are you talking about?
So
One that I
in
released.
Rails, in Rails 7, we've been doing some experimentation with active support notifications. And what we're seeing in some of our profiles is that the logging subscriber in that pipeline is really slow. And I haven't done any more digging into it. I was just curious if you all had seen that when you were doing your testing of Action View and active support. Okay.
No.
Okie dokie.
We have Action View turned off right now in production, if I remember correctly. So I think we'll flip it back on after this works out. So we'll have something, I think, to report. Hopefully, good. I don't even know what you want. Good news, hopefully, and then it's just your problem, not our
Yeah.
problem. I don't know.
No,
This-
I honestly, I don't know. Sorry.
So this active support, I'm only just seeing the PR. Is there now like an active support gem, instrumentation gem?
Yeah, correct.
Open
It-
I see open telemetry, instrumentation, active support.
Yeah.
And
So if you
has-
click, sorry, go ahead.
You said if you click, please continue.
Yeah, if you click through it, there's an example of how it works. So, example, yeah.
And did that get released, or do I need to do like a GitHub shenanigans in my gem file to use this today?
Yeah, I think you'll have to do some shenanigans in your jam file because we haven't done a release.
I am not opposed to shenanigans. Just
Rob, you can also do the request release function action to kick off a release request.
I can.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to walk me through that because
Hey, let's do that right now, Matt. Click on acciones.
What are we cutting the release?
I have no powers in this repo other than no power.
Wait, you're not a maintainer in there? I thought we
I'm a
voted you in as
member. I'm not an approver or a maintainer. And I
I
think
don't
that's
know about
appropriate now.
that.
I need to
Didn't
spend more
we
time with
vote
the
for
code
you?
base before you all trust me with a green check.
All right,
I
then forget
snuck
it.
in on a lot of talk and not a lot of action. They've improved their standards since then.
Good, because
I did like two. I think I've done like 4 PRs out of this like 7,000 that the rest of the team has done. I don't know. I got better status than you.
right now it's very much if you would have me as a approving member, I shouldn't join the club or however that saying goes.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. Well, then in that case,
Was Matt walking me through a request to release? Or there's a
sure.
button?
Yeah.
So I have the powers. I have not done a release in a long time, and the processes have definitely changed. Does anyone want to walk me through?
Yeah.
Are
Click
you-
on
Wait,
actions.
or are you okay?
Hey, yeah, I don't know how to do a release either. It's been one of the onboarding things here that I've been meaning to like do that I've kicked the can on.
But Ariel, you were saying
Click
request
the
a
link.
release.
Click the link that says actions
Tab. It's a tab.
up
The
there.
tab that says
Tab.
action.
Come on. These are hrefs, baby, with an A around them.
Okay. It's a link that sort of looks like a tab.
So
it's
open-
it's a link that would be where we would put a tab.
There is a workflow that's called open release request on your left-hand side.
Oh, get out. Look at that.
Hmm.
And then you can do run workflow if you hit that drop down there on the right-hand side.
That is a thing that I don't have.
And then it says, "Hey, I'd like to create a release for these specific gems." And then you have to, per the instructions, leave a blank to release all the gems or specify what gems you want to release. What it doesn't say is if it's comma separated or white space separated. But you would fill this form out and click run workflow, and then it'll open a PR that's getting you ready to do a tag. And then the approvers will have the ability to say like, yes, this will move forward. And then they take another step, something that I don't have the permissions to do. And then from there, I think it's going to be, it'll run a release based on a release hook. So there's like check commit messages, process release, yada, yada, yada. I assume there's some magic that happens there to
Ooh,
figure out where it goes.
I think active support might be underscored. I think.
I'm not approving anything until Robert and Francis are back, to be clear. Like, I'm not touching, it's not breaking. I have stuff I gotta do this week. I'm not letting something break.
Yeah.
If I've learned anything,
All right, hold your breath and hit run.
Our both of our safety nets are ice fishing. So yeah, we shouldn't.
well, I mean, we can click it. It'll just open a PR, I guess.
Yeah,
That's cool. I will note that even though I'm a member of the OpenTelemetry org, I do not have permission to see that button on the action.
So you could see the actions is running at this moment.
I can see the
And-
action. I cannot trigger the action.
That's okay. And then you can go ahead and click the don't do that. Don't do that. Click the link where the title is so that you can follow the action. And I'm doing a demo of the GitHub product, GitHub Actions. The CI/CD
All right.
workflow has completed. And it says here a version constant has been already 0.1.0. Was there a previous release of this gem, Tim?
Nope. This is the first one.
This is the first one.
Oh,
So now if you go into your pull requests, you should now see a release.
Oh, look
candidate.
at that.
Woohoo.
And you click
So I
in
guess the
there.
action would have tried to bump the version if it needed to,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
And what it does is that it looks at the commit log and it will generate the change log based on the commit log using the toys.
Toys. It's
Uh,
Daniel's like personal gem.
What is happening here? Oh my gosh.
I have questions about toys and appraisals.
You shall not see anything in here, Matthew, where because it hasn't released it yet. So
I was just like seeing if anything else is versioned similarly to 0.1.0. And
uh-huh.
there's
at one
some
point it was.
0.1-ish stuff in here. I just wasn't sure exactly how we were.
Oh, what our semantic versioning was?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we were starting off at like a slightly higher, somewhat more consistent number, but it seems like
It's the first one that probably has bugs in it, so it's a 001.
Yeah, as a semi outside observer, it's like the instrumentations that have been coming up through the ranks towards the API and SDK going 1.0 all had like matching version numbers with the API and the SDK, and now like the new
yeah.
instrumentations are, I don't mind low
Actually,
numbers.
I'm looking at it, and we're starting with the minor release, so I think that's okay.
oh,
So interestingly enough, it didn't do any of the in that change log. I don't see any of the commits. That's
The initial
curious.
release.
Interesting. Normally, it would list right, Tim. It would normally list the
The semantic commits or
keep a
whatever.
change log.
Yeah.
Keep a change log, right? That's what the name of the thing is.
What are you using? Is this the GitHub changelog generator that's
No.
cranking that out?
No. They could do that, but chose not to. They're using the toys, John.
Toys. Okay. I need to
The
dive
toys
more into
library? I
toys.
don't know what it is.
My initial desire was to see if the GitHub Actions could fan out all of the maybe. I know toys is the thing that's doing the per. I don't want to say gem, but I guess per gem tests, but it's sequential.
Is it?
I
don't know.
For it fans out for different Ruby versions, but then within a particular Ruby version, it's a serial test of this gem, this gem, this gem, this gem, this gem.
I
And
didn't
it
know.
does its bundle install for each gem, which I think is a toys combination with appraisal feature.
It's a
um,
lot.
I don't know if it would be madness to try to have that fan out again, to have like a 2-dimensional matrix of Ruby version and gem, so that
We do that map shuffle reduce. Yeah, I get it.
so that each thing can get run in parallel, and then when you're looking at GitHub Actions and like what failed, you aren't scrolling through 1,000 line log of toys output. It's the job that was named Ruby 2.7 OpenTelemetry instrumentation active support failed. I went, oh, cool. It's a nice to have. I don't want to mess with. This is a complicated beast and it's working. Just, it was a curiosity, not a pain point.
I do have to skedaddle, but if somebody would like to review this, I'd be happy to continue to push this release out as long as we're happy with it. So,
I will go put my not green check on it. Yeah.
um, otherwise I will see you all next week or online.
Peace. It was
you
always
guys.
fun talking to you all.
See
Enjoy
ya.
the rest of your Tuesday.
See you, folks.
Wait.